Chris and I had been doing graveyard shifts long enough to establish our rhythm, but that night felt off from the start. The first time the black sedan showed up, the clock had struck 12:30. I watched it circle the lot rather slowly and disappear, leaving dust and dread behind. It returned at 1:10, and then again at 1:45, repeating the same slow loop. I tried peeping inside, but the windows were too dark. When I told Chris about it, he shrugged and said, "Maybe they were lost. It is a highway, Maya." We went back to work, but I couldn't shake off the unease that something bad was about to happen. And it did, at around 2 a.m. I was scrubbing the counter when I heard car doors slam. I looked up to find two guys in black hoodies approaching us. Something about the way they moved made my heart clench. Before I could alert Chris, they kicked the door open.
"Make a sound and it'll be your last,"
one of them shouted, pulling out the weapon from under his hoodie. It was a crowbar, gripped like he'd used it before. His friend pulled out a hunting knife.
"Register, now!"
he snapped, making me jump. I tried to open the register, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Chris came out of the kitchen and immediately paled. "Easy," he said, putting his hands up. "Just take whatever you want." The knife guy jumped over the counter and shoved me aside. I stumbled and landed at Chris's feet, while the robber took the cash and growled as if disappointed.
$343? Where's the rest?
He demanded, eyes darting all around.
"Tell me or I start cutting."
"That's all we've got. Please, we don't..."
I choked. He retorted with a smack across the face so hard it made my ear ring.
"Lie again and see what happens,"
he hissed. Chris tried to step in, but the crowbar guy wouldn't let him. The swing landed hard in his ribs, making him drop to his knees. Before he could recover, the robbers started herding us both into the back office. They kept demanding money, hurling profanities and kicks. When they still couldn't find anything, the guy with the knife snapped. But before he could reach out to me, Chris pulled me up and shoved me back into the walk-in freezer. He slammed the door before I could react.
"Chris!"
I threw myself against the door, but it wouldn't budge. Through the small window in the steel, I watched everything fall apart. Chris was already bleeding from the ribs, yet he positioned himself between the robbers and the freezer. He kept shouting at them to back off, to leave us alone. They didn't listen. The crowbar guy kicked him in the face, making his nose just explode. Still, he wouldn't release his grip. I don't remember ever feeling so helpless and scared before. When they finally kicked Chris hard enough in the temple, his hands went slack, and I froze. I stared in horror as the knife guy pulled free and started toward the freezer. Chris launched himself off the floor and tackled him down right in front of my window. He was on top, trying to pin the guy, blood all over his face and dripping onto the man beneath him. That's when the crowbar guy brought it down on the back of Chris's head. My best friend went limp. The knife guy shoved him off, allowed him to roll onto his back before he drove the blade into the stomach. The scream tore through the room. It was wet and broken and full of pain. The guy pulled the knife out and stabbed him again. Chris's body jerked, and he made this choking noise. The third time the blade went in, Chris didn't make any sound at all. His hand just reached up, as if he was trying to hold on to something. Blood was spreading across the floor so fast I couldn't process it. The two guys realized what they'd done and bolted in panic. Chris was lying on his back. His arms were spread out, and there were 3 holes in his torso. Blood was pumping out with every heartbeat. His mouth kept opening and closing, but only more blood came out. He was trying to breathe, but couldn't get air. He turned his head toward the freezer. His hands started moving across the floor, and it left a trail of blood as it went. He pressed his palm flat against the door, right where mine was on the other side. 6 inches of steel between us, and I couldn't reach him. I watched his lips move. I couldn't hear him through the door, but I knew what he was saying. Safe. Then, his hands started sliding down slowly. It left a long red streak on the white door. His eyes were still open, still pointed in my direction, but he wasn't seeing anything anymore. What I remember most is the cold, how it crept into my bones and stayed there, how I screamed until my voice was completely gone, how Chris's blood looked almost black under the bright lights instead of red like it should have been. I don't remember who found us or called the police, but I do remember how hard I begged the paramedics to save my friend. They tried for 18 minutes, but 3 stab wounds and massive internal bleeding weren't something they could undo. Eventually, Chris lost the fight. Police caught the punks 6 hours later at a motel 2 towns over. They still had the knife and $347 in cash. That was the price of my best friend's life. It's been 9 months, and I'm still not over it. I don't think I'll ever be. Sometimes, late at night, I feel that freezer cold again. I see Chris's hands sliding down the door, leaving that red streak behind. The storm hit around midnight, making the McDonald's sign flicker and the windows rattle. I was working drive-thru, which meant wearing that stupid headset and pretending to be cheerful. Night shifts usually weren't that dead, but the storm had scared everyone off. I was wiping down the drink station when the headset beeped. "Welcome to McDonald's. What can I get for you?" Static crackled through the line before a male voice came through, sounding like someone was calling from a pool bottom. "Medium fries, vanilla shake." "All right, pull around to the first window." I glanced at the drive-thru camera monitor, but couldn't spot a car or a headlight. It was just the empty lot, and the speaker box getting hammered by the downpour. Sir? Are you still there?" I waited about 30 seconds, then pressed the button again. "Sir, if you're having trouble with your car..." The headset beeped. "Medium fries, vanilla shake," he repeated. I checked the camera again, but still couldn't spot him. "Sarah?" I called my manager. "The drive-thru camera's acting weird. Someone keeps ordering, but I can't see him." Sarah came over and squinted at the monitor.
Probably storm interference. Go check on them.
I grabbed an umbrella and pushed through the side door. The rain soaked me immediately. Outside, the parking lot was empty, except for our 2 cars. I walked around to the drive-thru lane. Suddenly, I spotted tire marks. They looked fresh, cutting through the puddles and leading from the speaker box toward the back of the lot. But they didn't curve toward the pickup window like they should have. Instead, they went straight back, past the dumpsters, all the way to the woods behind the store. Like the car had driven straight into the darkness and vanished. I paused for a second, but couldn't help to ignore the marks. I followed them deeper into the woods. A pair of headlights flickered through the branches, barely visible through the rain and trees. There was a silver sedan wrapped around a massive tree trunk. The entire front end had crumpled like a tin can. Steam rose from what was left of the engine, and the windshield looked like a spiderweb of cracks. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and turned on the flashlight. The driver was still in his seat, slumped sideways against the door, eyes closed, wearing a business suit that was completely soaked with blood. The entire left side of his skull had caved in. Bone fragments stuck out at angles that made my stomach turn, and I could see brain matter through the matted hair and split skin. He was sitting in the pool of his own blood. His jaw hung loose, barely attached by strips of tissue. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, stumbling backward. My hand shook, and I could hear my heartbeat in my ear. Before I could call 911, the headlights flared to life, nearly blinding me as if someone inside had just flipped them to high beams. Then, a voice hissed right into my ear, so close I felt cold breath on my neck. "You forgot my order." I spun around, but couldn't see anyone behind me except for trees and rain and darkness. When I looked back at the car, the dead man was sitting upright, with his eyes wide open, staring straight at me through the broken windshield, while blood continued to drip from his ruined skull. It felt as if he was neither dead nor alive. I ran through the woods, panting in fear and shock. I didn't stop until I burst through the McDonald's back door and slammed it shut. I told the manager everything. Sarah made the call while I stood by the locked door, staring out into the darkness. The police showed up about 15 minutes later with paramedics and a fire truck. I led them back into the woods, though every part of me wanted to stay inside where it was bright and safe. The car was exactly where I'd left it, still wrapped around that tree, but the headlights were dim again now. The horn had stopped. The driver was slumped sideways against the door, eyes closed, exactly like I'd first found him. One of the paramedics checked for a pulse and shook his head. "He's gone. Been dead at least 4 hours, maybe longer."
4 hours?
My voice came out higher than I wanted.
But I heard him. He talked to me.
"Son, based on the damage and the body temperature, he probably hit that tree around 8 o'clock tonight." The cop shrugged.
But the headlights came on.
"Electrical short from the crash," he explained, walking around the wreck. "Happens sometimes. Battery still got some juice in it. Makes the lights flicker on and off randomly." I insisted I had talked to him, but they all looked at me like I'd lost my mind and went back taking photos and measurements, then finally loaded the body onto a stretcher. I watched them zip him into a black body bag, and the last thing I saw was his ruined face disappearing behind the plastic. The cop came over and told me the guy's name was Robert James, 42 years old, insurance salesman from Seattle. He'd been driving through when the storm hit, probably lost control on the wet roads and ended up in our woods. They said it happens more often than people think. Nobody had heard the crash because of the thunder. Nobody knew he was out there until I found him. I quit the next day. Told them I was going back to school, needed to focus on classes, whatever excuse came to mind that didn't make me sound crazy. But I know what I saw, what I heard. Sometimes now, late at night when it's raining hard, I hear that voice in my head. I was 17 that November, working the closing shift at the McDonald's on Granville Street in Vancouver. It was a Friday, almost 11:30, and the rain was coming down in sheets. My coworker, Arya, was mopping near the bathrooms while I wiped down the tables, both of us watching the clock. 30 more minutes and we could lock up. That's when a man walked in. At first, he looked like just another late-night customer, drenched from head to toe, maybe a bit high, I'd presume from the way he stood inside the doorway staring right at me. His clothes, a dark hoodie and faded jeans, were soaked through and clung to his frame. But what caught my attention was what he held in his hand. It was a handmade doll, maybe a foot tall, with button eyes and brown yarn hair, pulled back into a messy ponytail. It had a tiny McDonald's uniform on.
Can I help you?
I managed a tight smile. My eyes kept flickering to the hideous toy. He didn't answer right away, just kept staring with these pale, watery eyes that didn't blink. Then, slowly, his lips curved into a smile that made my stomach drop. "You're even prettier in person." The way he said it sounded less like a compliment and more like confirmation of a fact he already knew. Arya looked up from her mopping.
You ordering something or what?
He ignored her completely. "I love watching you, Anna." He took a step closer, water squelching in his shoes. "You always tie your hair back the same way. Always wipe the tables starting from the left. You're so simple and predictable. It's so cute." My heart stopped. He knew my name and my schedule.
Who are you?
The words came out shakier than I wanted. His smile got wilder. "I brought you something." He held up the doll, and I saw it clearly now. The yarn hair was the exact shade and length as mine. The button eyes were as hazel as mine are. Around its neck was a tiny paper name tag with Anna written in slanted handwriting. "I made her myself," he beamed. "Took me 3 months to get the details right. The freckles were the hardest part." He turned the doll's face toward me, and I saw 3 tiny brown dots stitched across its fabric nose.
Arya, get Dave.
I choked. Arya ain't moving anywhere. Are you? He chuckled as he reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled the knife out. The blade caught the fluorescent light. My heart started pounding in my chest as I watched him press the knife against the doll's stomach. Do you have any idea how long I've been waiting for this? His voice cracked. All those nights I stood out East Hastings, 3rd floor, corner unit. You really ought to lock that bedroom window better, baby. My legs almost gave out.
Dave?
Arya screamed, backing toward the kitchen. I need you to understand something, Anna. The blade pressed harder against the doll's fabric stomach. You belong to me. From the first time I saw you 6 months ago, I knew. And if I can't have you... He looked down at the doll and plunged the knife in. The fabric split open with a wet, tearing sound. Instead of stuffing, the doll was filled with blood-soaked sponges, raw meat, and tubes of red gel. When he ripped the knife upward, it all came spilling out. Thick, dark liquid with chunks of red tissue poured onto his hands before it splattered onto the white tile. The smell of iron and rot hit me immediately. I wanted to throw up. See? He said, laughing, squeezing the doll until the mess inside burst out in chunks. How easy it is! He stabbed it again and again. Each thrust sent more red splattering across the floor and his clothes. The wet meat inside made sick squelching noises as the knife went in and out. This is what happens to girls who don't listen and ignore someone who loves them. I stared in horror as he grabbed the doll's head and twisted until it came off. More blood and tissue spilled, running down his arms. He held up the severed head, those button eyes still staring, and brought it close to his face. My Anna, he whispered, smooching it. Dave burst through the kitchen door with Arya behind him. What the... The man spun around, knife still in one hand, the doll's head in the other, red syrup dripping everywhere. For a second, nobody moved. Then, sirens started wailing outside, getting closer, and his face twisted. They're gonna take me away from you, he choked out, backing toward the door. But they can't keep me away. He clutched the doll's head to his chest, smearing red across his hoodie. Police came through the doors as he reached them. He didn't resist. Instead, he stayed still there in the rain. As they cuffed him, he mouthed something. I couldn't hear it over the chaos, but could read with my eyes closed. You're mine, Anna. You're mine. The cops revealed I was being stalked by this man for last 1 month. He secretly watched me during my shifts, maybe even followed me home at night. His name was Marcus Hendry. He was schizophrenic, off his medication, and had no family. That was 10 months ago. I moved to a different city, changed my digits, and dyed my hair blonde. I took up a simple gig at a bookstore where I never had to work nights. But some nights, I wake up at 3 a.m., convinced I hear breathing outside my window, convinced I see someone standing across the street in the shadows. The worst part is knowing he's still out there in a cell somewhere, counting down the days, still thinking and planning, because distances, walls, and bars do nothing to people like Marcus. They don't forget, and they know how to wait beyond forever.